All right, let's talk about the moment science takes off the lab coat and starts acting like the villain in a very stupid horror movie. Because when most people hear human experiment, they picture something clean. White walls, a clipboard, maybe some guy with glasses staring at a beaker like he just invented blue juice. What they usually do not picture is a prisoner freezing to death in a tank while a doctor writes stuff down. Or a man denied a cure for decades so officials can watch his body break apart. Or the CIA turning a safe house into a creepy little dungeon and drugging random people because apparently that counted as research. These were not accidents. They were funded, approved, and carried out by people who absolutely knew better. Some hid behind medicine. Some hid behind war. Some hid behind national security. All of them had paperwork. So today we're going through the most dangerous experiments ever done on humans. The kind where science stops helping people and starts acting insane. And somehow, in more than one case, the people behind this garbage did not even get punished properly. Let's start with the Nazis, because if you're making a list of evil freak behavior, these guys are showing up early. During World War II, Nazi doctors in camps like Dachau and Auschwitz used prisoners as test subjects for so-called medical research. Under SS supervision, inmates were dragged into experiments meant to support the German military and Nazi racial ideology. This was never about helping anybody. This was torture dressed up like homework. At Dachau, one major focus was high-altitude testing. German officials wanted to know how pilots might survive at extreme heights. So, prisoners were sealed inside low-pressure chambers that simulated altitudes up to around 68,000 feet, which is not a sentence that should exist. Victims blacked out, convulsed, suffered brain damage, and died. Some had hemorrhages in the brain, some had organ ruptures, others were pushed right to the edge and then dissected afterward so doctors could check the damage. Then came the freezing experiments, because apparently somebody looked at the first torture plan and went, "Cool, do another one." Prisoners were shoved into near ice water or left naked outside in sub-zero temperatures so doctors could measure how long the body could survive the cold. They shook, slowed down, lost consciousness, and died from hypothermia. Some were later re-warmed with methods that were also brutal and often pointless. The goal was not to save them. The goal was to see what happened while they suffered. Another set of experiments forced Roma prisoners to drink only treated seawater. No fresh water, no relief, just salt water and misery until they became so dehydrated they reportedly tried licking freshly mopped floors for moisture. A lot of prisoners died during these experiments. Others were executed afterwards so their bodies could be dissected. And the part that really gets under your skin is how official all of it was. Doctors, notes, procedures, men in uniforms pretending this counted as science. After the war, the doctor's trial exposed these crimes and helped lead to Nuremberg Code, which pushed the basic idea that human beings should probably consent before a doctor starts trying weird stuff on them. Now, if the Nazi experiments were already horrifying, Unit 731 somehow looked at that level of evil and said, "Yeah, let's make it weirder." In occupied Manchuria, the Japanese Imperial Army ran Unit 731 near Harbin as a giant biological warfare and human experimentation center. Thousands of prisoners were used there, mostly Chinese civilians, but also Russians, Koreans, and others, including women and children. Staff refer to the victims as logs because apparently dehumanizing people first makes it easier to do nightmare garbage to them later. Under General Shiro Ishii, prisoners were deliberately infected with plague, anthrax, cholera, and other diseases. Then researchers performed live vivisections without anesthesia to watch the infections destroy the organs in real time. Which is one of those details that sounds fake right up until you remember history is full of freaks with funding. Limbs were amputated and sometimes reattached in unnatural positions. Extremities were frozen solid to study frostbite. Victims were locked in pressure chambers until their eyes bulged or burst. Others were tied down and used to test poison gas, flamethrowers, grenades, and explosives. Very few prisoners survived. This was not a reckless program with some tragic deaths on the side. Death was baked into the whole thing. They were not trying to heal anybody. They were trying to see how much damage a human body could take before it quit. After Japan's defeat, many Unit 731 leaders avoided prosecution by handing over their data to the United States. So, instead of justice, a bunch of them basically traded mass murder notes for freedom, which is disgusting. Also insane, also real. Now we move to the United States, where the cruelty got less loud and way more bureaucratic. The Tuskegee syphilis study began in 1932 in Macon County, Alabama. The U.S. Public Health Service enrolled 399 black men with syphilis and 201 uninfected controls, most of them poor sharecroppers. The men were told they were being treated for bad blood, which sounds vague because it was vague. That phrase covered up what was really happening. Because they were not being treated, they were being watched. The actual goal was to document what untreated syphilis did over time. So officials found a poor black population, lied to them, and built a study around letting the disease keep moving through their bodies. Blood tests, exams, promises, fake medical concern, the whole rotten setup. Then penicillin became a widely recognized and highly effective cure in the mid-1940s, which should have ended the study right there. But no. Researchers kept it going for decades. They used placebos. They used sham procedures. Even worse, they actively denied the men access to real treatment because the whole study depended on the disease staying untreated. That is important. More than 100 participants are estimated to have died from syphilis or related complications. Some infected their wives. Some children were born with congenital syphilis. The damage kept spreading into families who never agreed to any of this in the first place. And what makes Tuskegee especially vile is how normal it looked from the outside. This was not some secret bunker in the woods. This was public health bureaucracy. Offices, forms, respectable men in ties making awful choices. The study finally ended in 1972 after journalists exposed it. Public outrage helped lead to the Belmont Report and stricter rules on informed consent and federal oversight in human research, which was badly needed because apparently do not lie to people and let them rot for data had not been obvious enough. And if Tuskegee made you think, wow, that is about as low as American public health ethics can go, unfortunately, they found a basement. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S. public health researchers ran sexually transmitted disease experiments in Guatemala involving more than 5,500 people. Prisoners, soldiers, sex workers, psychiatric patients, and children were all pulled into it without informed consent, which is a pretty impressive collection of vulnerable people if your goal is being completely evil. The work was led by John Cutler, who shows up here like the sequel villain nobody wanted back. This time, the cruelty was not just withholding treatment. Researchers deliberately infected people with syphilis, gonorrhea, and chancroid. Sometimes they arranged sexual contact with sex workers. Other times they directly applied bacteria to abraded skin, to men's genitals and faces, and in some cases through spinal injections. Which, yeah, is deranged behavior. Roughly a quarter of the subjects were deliberately infected. Penicillin was provided unevenly. Records were sloppy. Some people got treated. Some maybe did. Some probably did not. So even by the standards of this already rotten experiment, the researchers were still a mess. The studies were never properly published and stayed hidden for decades until a historian found the archival documents. In 2010, the U.S. government formally apologized to Guatemala and acknowledged the experiments as a grave human rights abuse, which is true. Also a wildly restrained way of saying, we infected a bunch of people on purpose and hid it. And now we get to the Cold War, where things somehow become both more secret and more stupid. Project MKUltra was formally approved by the CIA in 1953 as a mind control program. Already a very bad start. The goal was to manipulate human thought and behavior using LSD and other drugs, hypnosis, electroshock, sensory deprivation, isolation, and a bunch of other methods that sound like somebody dumped a comic book villain into a government office. Some of these experiments ran through universities, hospitals, and prisons. Some subjects knew they were in studies, but not what was actually being done to them. Others had no clue at all. LSD became one of the main tools. People were dosed without informed consent and then observed while their minds came apart. One infamous branch was Operation Midnight Climax, which sounds fake, but no, that was the real name. The CIA paid prostitutes to lure men into safe houses disguised as brothels. Once there, the men's drinks were secretly spiked with LSD while agents watched them through two-way mirrors. Prisoners were used too. Whitey Bulger was given LSD almost daily for over a year after being told the research might help find a cure for schizophrenia and could possibly benefit his sentence. Instead, he got turned into a nervous system piñata for the state. Some victims suffered long-term psychological damage, some died. One of the most famous cases involved Army scientist Frank Olson, who was secretly dosed with LSD at a retreat and fell from a New York hotel window 9 days later. In the 1970s, congressional investigations uncovered fragments of MKUltra after many records had already been destroyed, which, again, is not what innocent people usually do with their files. And that is the ugly little thread running through all of these stories. Different place, different excuse, same basic evil. Somebody in power decides another group of human beings counts less, and once that happens, the rest gets real bad real fast. That is why these cases still matter. Not just because they're shocking, though they are. Not just because they're weird. They matter because every one of these experiments was defended by people with titles, funding, and official reasons. Evil is not always loud. Sometimes it's organized, approved, and wearing a badge. And sometimes, somehow, it still calls itself science.